What's up, everybody? Pastor JD here. Welcome to your weekly prompt for Discipleship Table, or if you're just perusing our YouTube page, welcome and hope you learned something here. We're exploring this resource, Boundaries for Your Soul, and we've been working through boundaries around tough emotions in our life. And today, a super happy topic, being completely sarcastic, we're talking about boundaries with sadness. So, uh, who who else is inundated with Disney and Pixar movies in their life these years and days? Me. And one of our favorites in the Larson household is the movie Inside Out. And if you know the story of Inside Out, you know that the whole story is about the fact that joy and sadness are two sides of the same coin. It's basically a conceptualization of internal family systems. It's a whole film kind of about that, where you have different characters playing different emotions that have control over how this little girl's body functions and processes the grief of moving from Minnesota. Why would anyone want to do that in the dead of winter? To San Francisco. So there's this scene in the movie where they discover that sadness and joy aren't opposites. And the whole movie, sadness is depicted by this kind of sad, uh, a blue little figure, and she gets shunned. She's a troublemaker. She's always ruining things. And at the end of the movie, she gets this special place where she gets kind of a mature place to be able to influence maturity and safety in this little girl's body who attempts to run away from home, but sadness is actually the one that saves her because it gives her this perspective and empathy and the courage to be able to tell her parents that she's sad. So, uh, Pixar aside, that's, even though it's a cute little movie, there's a lot of truth in there. And that's basically with the invitation that we have today when we're talking about boundaries with the sadness that we experience. So buckle up. We're going to jump into the world of Inside Out and do a little bit of work ourselves. So sadness, let me just read a definition, then I want to read you with the quote or the first line of this chapter and have you process a little bit. Definition of sadness is the effect of unhappiness or grief or sorrow, sorrowful or mournful is what the definition is. So the chapter begins with this line in all caps: you need your pain. You need your pain. Depending on how you're processing sadness in your life, you may adamantly disagree with that or have a healthy relationship and agree that the pain in your life has helped transform you into who you are. So let's talk about that. The first question we like to ask is, because internal family systems is all about relationships with different parts of who you are, the first question is, how do you feel in relation to a sadness that you might be experiencing? Do you feel too close? Or do you feel a comfortable distance, like you can have a healthy reflection on the sadness in your life and it doesn't feel like it's controlling you? It doesn't feel, you don't feel the need to push yourself away from it. The other end of the extreme, the two ditches, are you too far away or too close? Here's just a brief description or a sentence from here that would describe maybe those two extremes, and then maybe you can just kind of reflect on where you're at with the sadness in your life. If the sadness is too close, you might be experiencing loneliness, self-pity, or even depression. If your sadness is too far, however, you may be denying reality and the importance of emotions in your life, and you may lack empathy for yourself and the others that you care about in your life. So maybe just put yourself on that map and say, the first step in the U-turn that we've been doing is to just focus on this emotion and befriend it. And the first thing you need to do is just say, hey, how am I in relationship with the sadness in my life? And part of the process of taking a U-turn with these emotions, which ultimately we want to, as the tagline says, turn our overwhelming thoughts and emotions into our greatest allies, like in the movie of where joy and sadness team up together to make this great, actually rich experience for, I forget the little girl's name, but that's what we're shooting for. So in so doing, in the process of focus and befriending and letting Jesus draw near, and then unburdening that part of ourselves and integrating it into who we are, we want to notice the benefits, um, the dangers, the needs, and the fears that we experience around any sadness that we might have. So the benefit is that painful loss deserves to be honored and offered up to God. That's why we want to engage with the sadness in our lives and offer it up to God, because it can remind us of our need for others and for God. It can help us become aware of our personal losses or burdens that we need to examine, that are shaping us and we might not even know it. It helps us to understand our heart. They're the heart of the things that we deeply love. It helps you develop empathy, like I was saying, and come alongside others. It makes you into a more powerful, holistic leader, actually, if you can empathize with others. It helps you to speak truth to your story, helps you to be honest with yourself and the world around you. Now, some of the dangers, these might be super clear to you. Um, but one thing to point out when we talk about dangers is that sadness, like other emotions, increases actually if you sweep it away. So sadness can actually have an increased effect if we're unwilling to focus and befriend our emotion. So this is the danger of it when we let it, when we don't have the capacity to do the work of the U-turn to befriend it and focus on it. We have feelings of being invisible or worthless, unlovable. We experience depression or despair, weariness, exhaustion. We can ruminate about painful memories in our life and they can hold us captive. We feel insecure. We have a sense of false guilt sometimes if we're not willing to examine the pieces of sadness in our life, or we can experience chronic shame. Now, what needs does sadness have in our life? What needs does that emotion have? It has a need for a safe place to grieve the people and relationships or opportunities that we've lost. Grief and sadness, when it comes up in your life, needs space. It needs a space to be processed. It needs validation for the sorrow it holds. Often sadness sticks with us when we don't feel like we're validated in that emotional response. When we're around a system of people or relationships that suppress the emotion of sadness and say, just buck up, move on. Men experience this a lot, where the tough thing to do is just process and keep, or not to process and keep moving. It comes up in different ways if we don't validate need it. It needs gentle boundaries so it can find its rightful place in our internal family system, which is what we're doing. So it needs boundaries to say, hey, you have a seat at the table. There's wisdom that you can give us. Sadness in our lives, you can give us empathy, but we need to set boundaries about what you can do. What does it fear? Sadness has some deeper root. It's an emotion that comes from an experience of fear of some sort of danger that we're responding to. And some of those might sound like in your life, if I move forward with my life, uh, the deceased or the loved one that I lost or something that I'm mourning might be forgotten. They might pass away in that sense. If I forgive someone, forgiving implies that my pain never happened, that I won't ever be validated or seen. Sadness might fear that exposing sadness in you will drive people even further from who you are. So there's this fear from where you're. There's this fear that by talking about sadness, you're going to drive people away even more. It fears that no one will pay attention to me if I'm not in need. So it gets used to this needy situation in a if sadness is overcoming you. So pause for a second. What of all that I just said in the benefits and the dangers and the needs and the fears kind of pulls at your heartstrings, the sadness that you might have inside of you? What kind of stirs up in that? I want to close with just giving you three roots of sadness, three different types of sadness for you to maybe identify a little bit more in the practice of focusing. And these are three things that cause sadness. Sorrow in response to losing what is good in our life. And a really clear example of this is if you lose someone close to you, a close relationship, or lose something that was really good that needs to be grieved. And that's what produces sadness most naturally in our life. Also, though, there is a sorrow in response to losing something that is bad. This is counterintuitive. And she gives an example of someone who's maybe in an abusive situation or something that continually hurts them, and they don't want to let go of an abusive relationship or something like that. And she gives this example of someone who says this, and she says, this is what's going on around their sadness. She says, so she was choosing the pain she knew over the pain she didn't know, and missing the opportunity to move forward with her life. So sometimes in our life, we fail to move beyond because we would rather stick with the pain we know than the pain we don't know in that circumstance. The last piece of sadness, or category of sadness, if you will, is the sorrow or sadness in response to a lost dream. So if God puts a dream in your heart, or you have this goal or this dream and that gets lost, hashtag 2020, if you had goals and perceptions for what 2020 would be like, or maybe you're at a place in your life where you wish you could have a kid, wish you could become parents, have a relationship at this point in your life, and there's a loss of the dream in you. I just want to close with this scripture, an encouragement where Paul says, in processing his own sadness, frankly, around a burden that's in his life, he says, God spoke to him, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made perfect in your weakness. And when we talk about making sadness an ally in our life, that's the ultimate hope, that we trust in God, that sadness can be a part of our lives, that by his grace, he has space to demonstrate his power in that and make us more and more mature people. So look forward to our conversations. Questions that you might want to carry with you are, how close do you feel to your sadness? Too close, too far? What of those benefits, dangers, needs, and fears resonate with your experience of sadness in your life? The last one might be those categories of losing something good, losing something bad, or losing a dream that you have. Which of those most resonates with the sadness that's present to you? And we'll have some great conversation, just creating space for vulnerable conversation around that, trusting that God will meet us there when we invite Jesus into our story.